So, how was lunch? Good? Tacos, yes, it was great. I mean, tacos are hip if you did not know. So we were trying to follow the trend or make a new one. So there's a lot of really exciting things going on. And there's this one really, really cool surprise that's coming up. And I'm going to build up the hype. And I know it'll be a surprise because I didn't know about it until very recently. So I know that you're going to enjoy it. Our next talk is a really, really interesting one that I think you're going to enjoy a lot. It's sponsored by CIBC, and the keynote is with Leaman from Axonify. And she's an incredible entrepreneur, 4-time successful entrepreneur, and I got a preview of her story earlier today. And without further ado, I'll just invite her on stage. Carol?
Thanks very much, Aidan, and thank you for having me at this conference. Often when I get introduced, this happened to me last week, I was at a conference, and they read a very long recitation of my history and all this stuff, and it makes me sound way more powerful than I actually am. And like many of you, I can hardly see out into the audience, but how many of you are entrepreneurs? Okay, good number, yay, that's awesome. I'm going to lead you through my story, my history, how I came to be here today, and hopefully be able to convey to you along the way some of the things that I've learned, a lot of the road tracks I've had, and to let you know that if you persevere, if you do all the things that they say entrepreneurs should do, you too can be very, very successful. So I'm going to lead you through, I have 2 slides, I think, that's it, but one is a build slide. And it's going to lead you through the history of my career, and I'm going to make some stops along the way. So the first thing I want to say is I grew up in Ottawa. I was not born in Ottawa. I was born in a tiny, tiny little fishing village in Newfoundland called Ship Cove. And for those of you familiar with the province of Newfoundland, there's what's called the Boot, which is a peninsula that sticks out the bottom of the province. And right down at the very tip of that boot is a tiny little fishing village. And my mother was 19 years old, met my father, who was 21 at the time, and an RCMP recruit who had just got posted to this little fishing village to be part of the police force there. And he promptly knocked up my mother. And so my mother found herself pregnant and unwed with this young man who had just become a police officer. So 5 months later, they got married. And 4 months after that, I was born. And so I come from very inauspicious start. And despite that, despite that beginning, my parents ended up being married for 50 years and really laid the foundation for so much of what came after. So my parents were very young, almost children themselves when you think about 19 and 20-year-olds today, but laid a very solid foundation for so many things that instilled confidence in me and just a very solid sense of I could do and be anything I wanted, which at the time was very different, especially for a girl. So we were posted to Ottawa. My dad was posted to Ottawa when I was 4 years old, and by then I had a sister. And I ended up spending all of my growing up years and my adolescence into teenagehood in Ottawa. And when I was a teenager, I met a guy who I was 16 and a half, he was 19, he was going to the University of Waterloo, and he was in the accounting program. And I started dating him long distance. I met him when he was on a co-op, his first co-op term. And when I graduated from high school, I was still dating him. And because I just wanted to be with him, I decided I wanted to be an accountant. So that's how I picked my formal education. I was dating a guy who was in accounting and I wanted to be with him, so I chose to be an accountant. Got to University of Waterloo, and A couple months later, and at that point we'd been going out for about 3.5 years, he was graduating. He kind of wanted to get married. I was 19. I was having none of that because the world had just been open to me. And so I did what some of you may be familiar with. It's called the turkey dump. And I broke up with him over Thanksgiving. And so I just started university. I was in a new place, getting an accounting education, and realized in that moment, I don't even like accounting. I'm a terrible accountant. I will never be a good accountant. I don't even like accounting. And what did I just do to myself? But I persevered, and I finished that education and ended up getting my chartered accounting designation. Now, backtrack a little bit. When I was 17 years old, a good friend of my mother's asked me one day, as I was coming towards the end of high school, so do you have any idea what you want to be when you grow up? And I said to her at the time instantly, I'm going to run my own company one day. And that was over 30 years ago. And to have a girl, a teenage girl, say, oh, I'm going to be a corporate CEO, and I was crystal clear about that, she kind of smiled and laughed a little bit and said, oh, good for you. And I don't know why, but I knew as a teenager that this would be my path. No idea how or why that idea came to me, but it did. And I articulated that. My educational path, becoming an accountant, I really had no concept how important that would ultimately become to my success. But it was a very happy coincidence, a very happy accident that I ended up getting my chartered accounting designation. So once I finished university, I joined KPMG and did the usual thing at KPMG, which really solidified my understanding that I was not a good accountant. And I really, really did not like that career. So I had a client at the time, an old Waterloo, Kitchener-Waterloo-based public company called Electrohome, call me and ask if I wanted to take a position in their corporate finance team. So I ended up leaving KPMG, joining Electrohome, and spent the next 5 or 6 years doing things that I really had no business doing. But I had a boss who just threw all kinds of stuff at me and expected me to do it. So at the time I was, when I joined Electrohome, I think I was maybe 26 years old. And all he had me working on were things like capital raising, mergers and acquisitions, selling divisions that we had, basically corporate development types of activities. And he was a very difficult person to work for. So I'd come out of this environment at KPMG and my growing up years, very stable, everybody who works in an accounting firm has the same education, is working on the same kind of work, treats each other with respect. There's just a very homogenous feel to the world of accounting. He was not like that at Electrohome. He was extremely difficult. He was a screamer. He threw things at you. He went from 0 to 10 on the anger scale in a millisecond. And I was terrified most of the years that I worked for him. But the one thing he did for me was challenged me to do things I had no idea how to do. So there was a day we needed money to do a particular transaction, and he walked in my office and literally kind of like, a Frisbee, threw 2 business cards at my face, and they fell on my desk, and he said, we need 40 million bucks. Go figure out how we get 40 million. And I think I was 27, and I looked at the business cards, and one was GE Capital, and one was a bank, and I had to just go figure out how to do that stuff. So I got an education in those years that accelerated my understanding and learning of so many things that, again, continue to lay the foundation for what ultimately became my real career, which was running early stage tech companies. We bought a company. So as part of that Electro-Home exercise, we bought a company in California called FakeSpace. This was in 1998 during the dot-com boom. Virtual reality was becoming a real thing. And we purchased this company that is across the street from where Google is now. And ultimately, I became the CEO of that company. My boss, that bully guy, he became the CEO first. And 2 years into that evolution, he got fired. And we had raised a bunch of capital. We had bought another company and merged it with FakeSpace. We were doing a bunch of transactional stuff. And he got offside our investors by just being himself, unfortunately, very, very aggressive, didn't listen to the investors, kind of stupid, and they had enough of it after 2 years. And so they fired him, and literally in the next breath turned to me and said, "Can you run this company?" And one of the things that was a reality was that because my boss was so terrifying for most people, nobody in the company ever wanted to speak to him. So they always came to me. And I became that nucleus, which is why when he left, it was easy for everybody to transition and to look at me as the new leader. So I had a very different style, very different sensibility about what needed done than he did. And the way that I treated everybody was so markedly different that it was a natural thing that I could slide into that role. So I did, and was running FakeSpace for a number of years when I was approached by a direct competitor to purchase the company. And I was very interested in that opportunity at the time because the biggest lesson that we learned at FakeSpace was market size. So the market for virtual reality at the time, and I'm talking very high fidelity, high priced, big solutions, was globally only $100 million a year. So only $100 million a year of this stuff was getting purchased by any company globally. And there were 5 competitors in the space, of which we were the largest. So we had a little more than our fair share of than compared to the next guy. So the competitor approached us, the second company, and it was a way to exit the business, get a good amount of money for our shareholders, and get around the fact that there was nothing we were going to be able to do as a business to drive the market to be bigger. There were all kinds of constraints on that market, and I say to entrepreneurs now, pay a great deal of attention to market size. Market size will kill you if it's not big enough and it's not growing as quickly as you think it's going to grow. So it's a mistake people make. They talk about billion-dollar markets. You really need to hone it down to what is the market for what you're selling really, and what is your opportunity to get a chunk of that market. You must pay attention to that. So sold the business and was working there, but was recruited to run a company in Kitchener-Waterloo called RSS Solutions. And this was a pure software manufacturing company. And it was during this phase when I started to run FakeSpace, moved to RSS Solutions, that I had this insight that this is exactly what I was supposed to be doing with my career. And somehow I'd taken this diversion through accounting, public accounting, the public company, and now I was in my lane. And I was reminded of what I had said as a teenager, that this is what I was meant to do. I was meant to run tech companies. So I started to run RSS Solutions. I was recruited by private equity who'd invested millions in that business. And they were doing $1 million a year of ARR. Actually, at the time, it was perpetual license. And they were spending about $5 a year. So huge cash burn. They didn't have a lot of money. And the investor was quite interested in seeing if somebody could come in and figure this out and get it turned around and on the right track. They just could not get above $1 million of revenue. And so I came in. It was 3 brothers and their father who had founded the business. There were about 50 people. And literally my first day, I asked for a financial statement. Could I see, what our revenues were, what cash we had, what accounts receivable, et cetera, what the expenses were. And the brother who had been the CEO prior to my getting there went out to see what he could put together and pull together and get for me, and he couldn't easily, which alarmed me a little. And so over the next 24 hours, I cobbled together a financial picture of that company and realized within 24 hours that we had $70,000 in the bank, and payroll on Friday was coming up, and we needed to fund $140,000 of payroll. So I called him back into my office and said, hey, where's the other bank account? Because, there's got to be another bank account. And he gave me a blank stare, and I said, Mike, there's only $70,000 in the bank. Payroll on Friday is $140,000, so I'm assuming there's money somewhere. I haven't been able to ferret out yet. And there wasn't. And so I said to he and his brothers and father, okay, you guys are going to have to pony up $70,000 on Friday because we have a disaster looming, and the 50 people sitting outside have no idea we're not making payroll on Friday. And I called the private equity firm, and long story short, they couldn't fund quickly enough because they needed to go through investment committee, and this was already for them a troubled account. The brothers and their father said, no, we're not going to make payroll. And so I had to go home that night and say to my husband, we have to write a little check on the line of credit. And so he said, what do you mean? And I said, how much? I said, well, like 70,000. And he's like, what? We're not married anymore. So wrote the check, made payroll, got reimbursed a week or so later by the private equity firm, and then spent the next 2 years in Crazy Town fixing so many things that they had done wrong. Wrong product, wrong market, B, C, D players on the team. Good people just not suited for the roles that they had been hired to do. And it was literally all I could do to get it turned around and then get it sold 2 years later to a strategic acquirer. So it was 2 years of very heavy lift, which caused me to then go, phew, got out of Dodge on that one. And as a result, I decided to take a year off and just help early stage tech, invest in some things that were interesting. And it was through that exercise and basically developing the Executive in Residence program for Communitech in KW that I met the founders of a company that I ultimately invested in, a company called PostRank. So PostRank, the original name of PostRank was Aid RSS. It was all about syndication, really simple syndication. And what we did was measured social engagement with content on the web. So if you had a blog or some kind of web property where Google Analytics measures everything on your property, your visits, time on site, et cetera, we measured what happened with your content off your property. So how many tweets did it get, Facebook likes, all those sorts of social interactions. And so we did that across about 20 social networks. I invested in that company because I met the 2 founders very briefly, and a bunch of my friends and a venture capital firm, I was very familiar with and friendly with the partners, they invested. And so I didn't do any due diligence, just wrote a check. And a few months later, I was sitting at my desk at home and I got a call from one of the partners at the venture firm saying, something's going on with the company, there's something, you know, not good in paradise, and can you get in there, meet up with the team and see what's going on? And so that's when I really got to know those two founders and instantly realized that there were issues. And so within a few hours, collectively with that VC made the decision that one of the founders had to leave the business. And it just so happened that the day I started, he was going to a conference out of town, and the business, interestingly, was in his house. And he didn't want the business to leave his house. And so he left at noon. At 12:01, I called U-Haul and called somebody else to help us find 1,500 square feet. And the next morning, drove the U-Haul out to the business, which was in the woods, in the country, got stuck in a snowbank, had to call the guys in the house, where there were 10 or 12 developers, asked them to come dig my vehicle out. They came over the bank 20 minutes later. Where's your car? I said, I don't have a car. We have a U-Haul. We're moving today. So there was snow falling gently, and so they dug the truck out, and we got all of the business stuff out of the house and moved into a 1,500 square foot facility for a few months. It was right towards the end of post-rank that my marriage was falling apart. And nothing dramatic. My husband and I, just extremely different people, which goes to that entrepreneurial thing. I'm a huge, huge risk taker, and he is not. He is an engineer, just a very steady, safe, secure-oriented person. And through all of the experiences that I was having as an entrepreneur, my appetite for risk actually grew. It didn't diminish, it grew. And there were many, many things that I wanted to do that he just couldn't wrap his head around. It was just too much risk for him. And so in 2010, we decided to part ways. And it was right towards it was about a year before I sold Post-Rank. So we ended up exiting that founder, around the business for 3.5 years, and as the CEO and as an investor. And the founder, incidentally, the technical founder, was a 22-year-old Russian genius young man who did not communicate well with anybody. He was the black Russian cloud. And so we had a very effective partnership as we grew that business. So Post-Rank was running, going, we were doing well, and I was dismantling my marriage. And one of the things that I did, because I felt quite guilty about breaking up the family and all of that, I decided in a moment of, I don't know, craziness, to basically give my husband everything we had. So everything we owned in life, I gave him. And I left with my clothing and my paycheck. But I kept my shares in Post-Rank, which at the time I had no idea how those would end up coming to fruition. And so in January of 2010, the only thing I took out of my marriage was $250,000 of debt that we had. And that was for a whole variety of things. And I took that because I knew he would be anxious about keeping that debt. So gave him the house paid off, everything. I kept the debt, my clothing, and the old car. And then I had to go buy myself a new house. So I bought myself a new house, and in 2010, I, at the age of 42 or 43, had now $750,000 of debt, and my paycheck. That's what I had in life 8 years ago. And the only reason I was okay doing that was because I knew I'd make it back. I knew the easiest option for me was I'd make it back. And I had this crazy amount I had friends say to me, "You are insane. You should be getting child support. You should be getting blah, blah, blah." He was a high income earner. So I paid child support to him. And so that's what I had 8 years ago. A year later, out of the blue, Google came and bought PostRank. And so I made a little bit of money when I sold Google, or PostRank to Google, which allowed me then to have some choice. And my choice was, do I go to Google, or do I do something which was a little crazy again, and that was buy Axonify. So one of the things that I do in my spare time is mentor early stage entrepreneurs, and the founders of Axonify had come to me. They were not your typical 22-year-old Russian genius kid. They were 70 years old. They were a husband and wife who had a marketing business. And they had a customer called the Pep Boys, big automotive retailer, that they had been delivering learning material to, posters, written material. And Pep Boys said, "We're not going to buy posters anymore. They don't work to change behavior of our associates and get them to stop stealing product on the shelves, stop having accidents in the stores and distribution centers. We need a better way to get people, for the short period of time we have them, to change their behavior and reduce these areas of loss." So John, the husband, conceived of this little idea to put an app on the point of sale terminal that would train people every single day for a few minutes in a really fun way. They hired a couple of developers, they built it, they rolled it out to Pep Boys, and in the first year, they saved Pep Boys $40 million. So then they didn't know what to do with this thing. And they came to me, and I had been helping them since the summer of 2010. Just try to figure out who else they could sell it to, all manner of things around the business. So when I sold PostRank, I had had that intuition all the way along through those previous months that I think I could turn this little tiny piece of ugly code, and it was quite ugly, into a big company. So when I sold PostRank, I gave half my after-tax proceeds to my ex-husband, again, and took what I had left, paid down some of my debt, and then used the rest to buy the shares of Axonify and started over. I had 2 employees. I brought a business partner in and started over from scratch through the technology on the trash heap and re-architected everything, raised a little bit of capital, and by September 2012, 6 years ago, we relaunched the product, brand new platform, and started then building the business from essentially that one customer, the Pep Boys. So here we are, 6 years, just over 6 years since the launch of PostRank, and we have 175 people, a couple hundred customers, mostly large corporate enterprise. Enterprise sales is hard, extremely difficult. And $20 million US of ARR, hopefully continue to grow very rapidly. And it's been probably the most fun journey I've had. I've learned those lessons all the way through each of the companies, and all the lessons are different. Somebody asked me yesterday, does it get easier? It doesn't get easier, it gets different. And it does get more fun, because you can accelerate through many of the things that you learned along the way. And the reality is you're always going to meet a new challenge you've never seen before. So your task is, as an entrepreneur, to just bust through it and keep going. And somewhere during this journey, I had this thought that lots of people are successful all around me. And I honestly have average intelligence. I am no rocket science genius. But what I have is a belief that no matter what, nothing's going to kill me. I will always get through it. I'll always see the other side. And I had this idea that if that person can do it, and I actually don't think they're that smart, why them and why not me? So this whole idea of why not me? Why not me? Became my mantra. If they can do it, why can't I do it? Because most of us can do it. It's the intestinal fortitude, it's the desire to want to make it happen, it's that element of being a risk taker, which is in your DNA, which is so important for an entrepreneur to have. So, many, many, many life lessons, but I put 4 here. Something I have learned, be nice. There is no reason not to be nice to people. Through that journey, I've met lots of people who don't treat other people well. And I can tell you that being nice to people you are grinding your teeth around and in your head thinking you're the biggest idiot I've ever met in my life, or, you know, I'm really angry about something, just treating people well lifts you to success. Always keep that in mind. There's no reason to treat anybody poorly. Things do always work out in the end, no matter what. You have to have that fundamental belief. There is always a new day. When you think about all the challenges that you've had in life, that in that moment you thought, I'm never going to get through this. I don't know how I'm going to deal with this. It feels like the worst thing in life. All those things end up in your rearview mirror. And as the years go by, you barely remember the details. So think about that when you face challenge. There's always the next day. There's always the new thing. There's always a path forward, no matter what. You must focus on making the best of whatever life hands you. And don't be afraid. Fear has never been a factor for me. I should go on that show. Fear is actually something that can propel you to success if you don't let it overtake you. So don't be afraid. The most successful people just go for it. And I can tell you, had I not made that very tough decision to leave my marriage, start over with less than nothing, a great big hole to dig out of, I would not be standing here today. I'd have another job and I'd be doing good things, I'm sure, but it was that event that allowed me to really be able to do what I wanted to do at a much bigger scale. So don't be afraid. Make decisions that make you uncomfortable, because they will always work out in the end. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, CIBC, for sponsoring that talk. I think Carol summarized it well with her 4 points, but if all of us really live that idea of don't be afraid and go for it, I think a lot of incredible things would happen.